Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Greco Chess YouTube channel, the channel of chess. I'm your host. My name is Kari Lausaneziris, and in this video, we are going to present the game I played yesterday night at the Queen's Chess Club at the second round of the Amateur Two-Player Team Championship. And let's start first by sharing the screen and showing to you the announcement of the tournament. Here we are. Takes place at Floral Park in 4 consecutive Fridays, started January 9th, where I started with a loss, and yesterday night, the 16th, round number 2, the game I'm going to show now. 2 more Fridays, 2 more rounds on January 30th, 23rd and 30th, and the time control. Here you see 4 Swiss rounds, G90 D5. What does this mean? It means that when the game starts, players have 90 minutes on their clocks, and when it's your time to move, then for the first 5 seconds, the clock does not move, and then it continues going downwards. Round number 2, a member of a team that I called the last moment because last Friday when I arrived at the tournament, I had no partner, and at the last moment, another player was in the same situation, and we formed a team. The last moment, both of us started with a loss the first Friday, and now this is round number 2 for me. And let's go. First of all, let's give a look at who was my opponent yesterday at round number 2. His name is Eric Jimenez, and his rating is 1653. Compare this with my rating, that is 1551, even though it will go up 1631 once the new ratings come up. Still, I'm a little bit less than him, so he was a slight favorite, but let's see what happened at the board, especially having recently defeated players with ratings of 2,900. I was quite optimistic that I had some good chances. But let's go to the board of chess.com, and here we are. I'm going to copy the moves from the score sheet, enter them, and the computer is going to tell us what does it think. Think, of course, of this figure of speech. What is the evaluation? Positive number means white is doing better. Negative, black is doing better. It will show, to make a comment on the move, anywhere from brilliant to the top or blunt at the bottom. And will show what should have been the best move of the player, and with the top 5 options for the player whose turn is to come. And I'm having the white pieces, and I'm starting with my pawn going to e4. The standard way open. King's pawn opening. You see here the comment of the computer. What does it? The name of the opening, so long as we are in the opening phase. And Eric replies with placing his pawn to d6. This is the perk defense. Here you see the various names. And I want to control the center. My pawn goes to d4. And Eric decides to prepare fianchetto. Pawn goes to g6. This is called the modern defense with e4. That is how the computer calls it. I move my knight to f3. And Eric, this is called, now look at the various names. Reti opening, knight's fianchetto variation. Every move, the name might change. And Eric completes a fianchetto. Bishop goes to g7. Again, modern defense with e4. I move my pawn to c3. Why do I do it? Of course, in the beginning, the main purpose of the players is develop the pieces, control the center. I push my pawn to c3, so I control the d4 pawn with a pawn and not a piece, so it cannot be attacked. If, for example, I had it's only defended once, for the time being, it doesn't need more defense, but you never know how things could change, and better be prepared, because currently, even before my move, it's attacked once by the bishop on g7, defended once with my knight on f3, so it's safe. But you never know what would happen. A knight could land on c6, for example, or anything like that. That's why be ready now, so it is not going to be easily dislocated. Knight goes to f6 for Eric. Continues the development. This is called now the modern defense Geller system. I've seen this series of moves. I didn't know how it was called. I know Eric Geller was one of the top chess players about 50 years ago, a little bit more than 50 years ago. And now, in addition to developing the knight, Eric attacks my pawn on e4. I need to do something. And I move my bishop to d3, and now I'm defending my pawn on e4. And Deller and Geller, not Geller. This is once again, it's called a peg defense. And Eric moved his pawn to c6 to open room for the queen. This is a good but not an excellent move. Here we completed the first 5 moves. I have a small advantage of 0.65, means almost nothing, mostly because I started at first, and a little bit because the last move of Eric was good and not the best. Let's continue. Castling both sides. I send my pawn to h3, and I'm going to explain why. Computer says it's excellent. The reason I did it is because I wanted to move my bishop to e3, queen to d2, exchange on h6, and have a queen on h6, and knight on g5. I have a very strong attack, even though there is no mate so long as there is a knight on f6. But to do it, if I directly move my bishop to e3, the first step, Eric would send his knight to g4, and that's what I did not want to happen. I was not so much scared about the bishop going to g4 because once it did so, I would send my pawn then to h3, and Eric would have to make the decision, either exchange on f3 or send the bishop back. If he sends it to h5, pawn to g4, and bishop is lost. That is one of the issues that you're facing if you start with the g pawn, going to g6. Queen to a5 for Eric. Good moves to the computer, not the best. Would rather have the knight develop to d7. You don't want to move your queen unnecessarily too early, but Eric really had the reason because the queen on a5 is controlling a lot of central squares. d5, e5 can even go to h5, and with a combination of bishops, perhaps sacrifice a bishop for 2 pawns, and really cause me problems. My bishop now goes to e3 as planned. And Eric places his pawn on e5. My queen goes to d2. And Eric's rook goes on d8. What is he thinking? He's thinking that, of course, I don't know for sure what he's thinking, but what he should be thinking is that his rook is opposite my queen. So if the pawns are exchanged on d4 or e5 especially, then the bishop on d3 is the only thing keeping his rook from d8, taking my queen on d2. My bishop goes to h6 according to the plan, to exchange the bishops. But now that the rook is not in f8 any longer, he can safely put his bishop back to h8. If he had not moved his rook, then he couldn't do it because then I would win the exchange. And if he didn't move his bishop, then we would exchange on h6, and really he would have a weakness in the dark colored squares near the king. But now his bishop is at the corner. If you have a bishop, if it's at the center, it controls 13 squares. Of course, assuming the board is empty. At the corner, it controls only 7 squares. That's why you don't like bishops at the corner. We completed the first 10 moves. Computer thinks this is an inaccuracy. Would rather have the bishop stay on g7, and then my best move is queen to e3. It would not even be to exchange the bishops. Although most likely that's what I would have done. And after the 10 moves, after this move that the computer thinks it's inaccuracy, I'm ahead by 1.02. Let's continue. My bishop goes to g5, then pin the knight. Here, there is the rook. Usually, when you have bishop g5 and knight f6, it's a queen on d8 that is pinned. Having a rook instead of a queen has one advantage that there is less at stake, meaning if he accidentally, if for any reason he moves his knight, I'm only winning an exchange and not a queen for a bishop. But the problem is that his knight needs to be defended by something else. Currently it's a bishop on h8, because if it was a queen, he doesn't even need a bishop at h8. If I take the knight, the queen takes back the bishop. Now, of course, the rook cannot take back the bishop if I decide to win his knight. And let's continue. Eric decides to start opening the center. Pawn goes to d4. Mistakes as a computer. Would rather have the rook go to e8 and stop the pin. I take back. Now, when I took back, I knew that his queen and my queen were facing each other. So I had to think, am I ready for queen exchange? And really quite spent some time thinking of it. And I decided to take it. And I'm going to explain to you my thought. First of all, the moment that he took the pawn on d4, let's go back one move, his queen was attacking my bishop. My bishop was protected by the knight and by my queen. If I was not careful, of course, I could easily end up losing a bishop. But I was thinking, no, if I took with a knight, then the bishop would still be supported, but only by one force, the queen here, and not the entire knight. And that's why I decided after that to take with my pawn. Inaccuracies as a computer. The computer would rather have me push the pawn on b4 and attack the queen. I thought of it, but the problem is I'm exposing myself too much. Look at that. We have bishop on h8, the same diagonal with my rook on a1. I had to be very, very careful. Um, to make sure this would not happen. And unfortunately, yes, ironically, I would say by playing this, I made it a little bit easier for his bishop from h8 to go to my queen on, to go to my rook on a1. Now I'm putting Eric in a dilemma, exchange queens or not. If he wants to exchange the queens, I'm going to take it. The computer wants with my F knight, I will take it with my B to, first of all, to develop this knight and then to give space to my rook. And also, in case worst comes to worst is lost, at least I would get it back with my other rook. So it loses an exchange and not an entire rook. That was my plan. If you exchange queens, my knight will go there. And you'll spend some time on your clock thinking, should you or shouldn't you? Because this is a crucial moment. And finally, after quite some thought, Eric decided to place his queen on b6. First of all, he cannot leave it here. He doesn't have too many choices. Either queen takes the queen, or goes b6, c7, or a4, three squares where the queen is safe. Goes to e4, I develop my knight on c3, attack the queen. I was not sure what to do with c7, so I knew that eventually, if he did not exchange queens, he would go either b6 or c7. Computer would rather have the exchange, the top suggestion for black. But black, Eric decides to place his queen on b6 and save the queen for now. And attacks my pawn on b2. Currently, the pawn is protected by my queen on d2. Computer thinks a mistake and gives, you see, quite a large advantage, 196. And then I decided to do a quote unquote crazy combination, a multi-move combination that I thought was going to give me a material advantage. I was taking advantage of the pin on f6. I pushed my pawn on e5, and of course he's going to take it back. I take it back, and it seems that the knight is lost, or if the knight moves, at least an exchange is lost. But he has a nice intermediate move. Knight goes to e4, threatens my queen. Then I take the rook, he takes the queen, I take the queen, and then he takes my bishop and I take the knight, and there should be a piece ahead. I had missed the intermediate Zwickenzug move that you're going to see later. Zwickenzug is a German word that means intermediate. So still, I will win a little bit, but not so much. But let's see how the combination continued. Pawn to e5, pawn to e5. Missing the computer would rather have me develop my knight. Pawn here, Of course, his rook cannot take my bishop because I take the rook and win an exchange. Then, yes, his queen will take my pawn. It is very, very tricky and threaten the rook, but my knight could go away and he could not take. Because the moment the queen goes to d3, the b2 pawn is not supported any longer. I still thought even in this case I would be ahead, and perhaps I would. But knight goes to e4. That's what the computer has a stop move for black, and rook takes to d3 is only the third option. Here we go. I expected it. I take, he takes, I take the queen, and then I thought that if he saves his knight, I'm saving my bishop. If he takes my bishop and his knight, and then I saw that he had the Zwischenschuk move that I had not predicted. But first, yes, we finished 15 moves before I take the queen. I have an advantage of 0.61, a very small one. It wasn't so winning as I thought. He takes, and then I saw to my horror that he had a Zwischenschuk. My calculations were not very accurate. Still, I'm not going to lose the game, but I had not seen that he could take my knight. A great move, of course. The only thing otherwise would be dumb material, and then I take, and then what I thought that he should do, and the computer does not agree with me, is put the bishop on e5 because my pawn on b2 is in danger to have somewhere to save it, and while I save it, he takes the bishop. So in addition to winning my piece, he would also win the crucial central square at e5. Computer does not agree with that, and rather have Eric do what he actually did. Pawn from a7 goes to b6. Now I have to save the pawn on e5. It's a crucial one. Not only it is a nice central pawn, but it blocks the bishop on h8. It's wonderful to have your opponent's bishop blocked at the corner and not be able to go out. That's why I send my pawn to f4. Computer doesn't like it, thinks it's good, would rather have my rook go to e1. But I thought that if I put my rook is stuck on the e file, but otherwise with the pawn on f4, we have pawn supporting pawn. And in case he would push the pawn to g5 to undermine it, would exchange pawns, but his king would be too exposed. What he decided to do is take a loose pawn on h3. This caught me by surprise. I had not seen it because my mind was on e5 and here, but fortunately that's only a pawn. What you're seeing here materially is that I have won an exchange. I have two rooks and two minor pieces. He has one rook and three minor pieces. So I have an exchange. But before that, we had 6 pawns each of us. So I'm up by an exchange. But now I have bound a pawn. I have an exchange, but down for a pawn. My rook, of course, is going to move, goes to e1. More protection for the pawn at e5. In case he plays something like pawn goes to g5. His knight goes to d7. Develops a knight. The knight doesn't have too many squares to go. e5, f6 are taken. Can only go to c5, for example. Or back to f8. My bishop goes to c4. Why? And the computer thinks a mistake. I wanted to pin the pawn on f7. Computer thinks a mistake, and for the first time in the game, I'm down by 0.19. Very little, but as before, the various inaccuracies put me quite ahead. Now, even though I have the exchange for a pawn, I am down according to the computer. I didn't feel it at that game. At that game, I was optimistic all the way through. Knight goes to c5. Computer thinks it's inaccuracy, and after the 20th move, computer would rather have the pawn go to b5 and attack my bishop. The bishop would go back to b3. After the 20 moves, I'm again a little bit ahead, 0.46, not too much. During the game, I was feeling More optimistic than that. I felt I have an extra exchange. Yes, I lost a pawn, but his bishop is stuck on h8. From now, things can only go better. That's what I was thinking. And let's see what happened. Now it goes to c3. Why? Of course, I want to develop my knight and control crucial squares e4 and c5. But what I was worried is if his pawn went to b5, and if I wanted to continue having control on pinning the pawn on f7, I have to go to b3, and if his knight takes it, then I cannot take it back because he will win my rook. But now this will not work because if he takes my rook, my other rook is going to take back. That was my thought. He plays perhaps a little bit too late a pawn to b5, but the computer thinks it's the best move. It's good now before that was the best. Attacks my bishop, and I have to think what to do with my bishop. I was seriously thinking to put it to f1 and exchange it with the white bishop. Of course, white doesn't have to exchange, can send the bishop back. But I decided that I like the pin, and bishop goes back to b3. Inaccuracy is a computer. Bishop goes to f5. So exchange bishops or not. Sorry, I said e5, which is the correct thing, but yes, but what he actually played was goes to f5. That was the best. He controls crucial squares, d3, c2, b1. Now, my bishop to b3 has another purpose in addition to pinning the pawn at f7. It protects the pawn at a2, and now my rook on a1 is free to move, because before that it was stuck protecting the pawn on a2. Bishop goes to f5 for Eric. And now what do? I want to change here because I don't like his knight at c5 and his bishop at f5 control too many crucial squares. Plus, yes, he'll not win anything, but he can double my pawns on the b file. I didn't like that. That is why I wanted an exchange on e4, but now I cannot do it because if I send my knight on e4, he takes it and I cannot take it back. That is why I pushed my pawn to f3 to facilitate this exchange, because if I put my knight later on e4, he has to choose either, and later put my knight on either to exchange here or to take a b3, and in any case, I'm getting rid of a very powerful knight on c5. So I push my pawn to f3, which the computer thinks inaccuracy. Eric is once again ahead. His knight goes to d3, what I was afraid. Now, and I was afraid he would do it, but I didn't see how dangerous that would be. I saw that he could threaten my pawn on b2, and I would have perhaps to move my rook to e2. But what I didn't see is at the same time he's simultaneously threatening the pawn on f4. So he will win one pawn or the other, no matter what I do. And once his knight landed on d3, I saw it. He already got a pawn for the exchange. Now he's going to win a second pawn. What can I do? If I decide to save the pawn on b2 as I wanted before by sending my knight on e2, he'll take f4 and he will also threaten my rook, and I have to move my rook again. So I said, since he'll take a pawn either way or rather, let him choose which pawn he wants, but I'm going to put my rook on e3, not in a light square, so don't have to worry about the bishop on f5. And if he takes a 4 pawn, I don't have to move my rook again. He takes a pawn on f4. Of course, it is a more important pawn, more advanced, and also the one that one of the two reasons why it protects the e5 pawns and blocks h8. Now the pawn on e5 is only protected by my rook on e3. My rook goes to d1. I don't need the rook to protect the a2 pawn in one because we have the bishop on b3, and I want to control the open d file. Open meaning there are no pawns there, whether white or black, and rooks love these diagonals. To make things worse for black, he cannot send his rook on d8 to challenge because I'll take it, no support. So the entire d file is mine. Eric decides to liberate his bishop, but he cannot do it in one step because e5, he'll lose it from my rook. He sends it to g7, hoping to put it h6 next move. And if that's what he does, then indirectly, I have to be careful about my rook on e3. Because if I do nothing, rook goes, knight goes from a4 to h3 check, and I lose my rook. I cannot even take back the knight because it's protected by the bishop. Completed 25 moves, and let's see the score. Eric is ahead by 0.31. What I wanted to do is, at this point, I wanted to change the knights. But I was so nervous, believe it or not, as I saw my advantage disappearing, that accidentally I take my knight from c3 and land it on f2. And my opponent shouted immediately illegal move, and he was right, of course. And I was glad it was illegal because I wanted to exchange the knight. If it was legal for any reason, my plan would not work. After my opponent noticed it, I placed correctly the knight on e2 just as I had decided. And also, the good thing is if we change knights, then I don't have to worry about the bishop on h6. Uh, threatening my knight on e3. What does he do? He does a check on h3. Fortunately, the bishop is not yet on h6, so I don't have immediate danger of losing my rook on e3. Where to put my king? The computer would prefer my king goes to f1. The problem with f1 is I'm not attacking the knight. I wanted to attack the knight. Of course, it's defended by the bishop on f5, but if the bishop either is lost or has to get out of this diagonal, then I win the knight. That's why I never thought of, or very briefly thought of f1. I only thought g2, h2. The problem with g2 is, if the knight was not here, he could check again. Now he cannot even do that. I decided g2 instead of h2 because I don't want his knight, in case there is any danger, to escape on f2. Now his knight cannot go to f2. That's why I placed my king on g2. Inaccuracies the computer. Eric starts building an advantage. His bishop goes to h6. Threatens my rook. And to my horror, I found that, or at least to almost my horror, I found out that my rook, most of the squares, it cannot be go. These two bishops are too dangerous. But to my relief, I saw that there was one square that my rook could go, and for time was safe. This was c3. I don't like the fact my rook to have only one square to go, because if this square is taken for any reason, then I lose the rook. Now, Eric decides to, now that the rook is not on the e file, to send his own rook on the e8 on the e file, and I can't see how I can keep the pawn on e5. If I push my pawn to f4, the other one from f3 to f4, it's attacked twice by knight and bishop, knight h3, bishop h6, defended only by the knight on e2, so I'm going to lose both f4 and d5. So I saw that I was already down 2 pawns. I had to exchange, but I was down by 2 pawns, and now I was going to lose a third pawn, which would mean that materially I'm really down. 3 pawns for the exchange are too many. What can I do? I decided to give more safety to my pawn on uh, f3, help it go to f4, and also surround the knight, and and not have to worry about potential check from the knight. So I move my king from g2 to g3. And computer thinks a mistake. Now Eric's advantage is significant, 2.00. Which, if I didn't know it, if I knew at the time, I would feel very nervous, to say the least. I would feel very bad and disappointed. But during the game, I felt that it's still a game. I didn't like how things were going. I saw Eric starts approaching me, and the advantage I got with the exchange disappearing. It was, of course, it was not so big as I thought, but and Eric finally takes the pawn. And now a great move. The computer, but was too obvious. I don't like when the computer says great move for a move that is very obvious. What else could he do? And not only he wins the pawn, he's ahead. He has 3 pawns for the exchange, but he's also attacking my knight on e2. So I need to move my knight. Or maybe, how can I protect it? If I put my rook to d2 to protect it, bishop takes it. If I put my rook to e1, temporarily it is safe, but maybe not for too long. It is under threat, it's pinned, the rook is also has to get stuck on e1, I lose control of the e-file, so I knew that really I had to move my knight, and I move it to d4 with the idea that threaten the bishop on f5. If I take it, he takes back, I win the knight. If he sends it back, where can he send it? g4, nope. E6, no, we'll exchange and then I win the knight. d7, nope, my rook will take it. He has to send it back all the way to c8. But he doesn't necessarily need to save the bishop immediately. Computer thinks my move was inaccuracy, would rather have me first check with my rook on d8. I wanted my rook to be able to go to h1 and threaten to win 2 pieces for the rook. That's why I didn't do it. And Eric, instead of sending the bishop back all the way to c8, he decides to do something else. I had also considered it. It didn't catch me by surprise. I didn't like it, but at least it did not surprise me. Bishop goes to f4 with a check. Computer would rather have the bishop go directly to c8. And now we finished 30 moves, and believe it or not, Eric is ahead by 2.87. It's an important difference. I didn't know it at the time, but I knew that things were not going well at all. I have lost 3 pawns for the exchange. And now, where should I put my king? Not too many positions. It's only g2 or h4. And believe it or not, and at that time I saw it, that if I put on h4, it could easily land to checkmate 3 moves. I could see pawn goes to g5, king h5, bishop to d6 check. And yes, king goes to h6, and this pawn. I didn't see maybe all the way till the end. I saw that it would mating net would be around my king. The chances to escape were very, very small. So what can I do? The only alternative that was there. King goes to g2, and for the time being, I am alive. Alive, but according to the computer, I'm down by 3.04. And now, Eric fortunately cannot check with his rook on e2 because of my knight on d4. But this meant that, okay, first he needs to save the bishop. But after he saves it, if his pawn goes to c5, my knight has to move, and then rook goes to e2, and the check is very dangerous. There are very few squares around my king. But first, he saves his bishop to c8. Otherwise, if he directly, of course, attack my knight would take his bishop, and then I would win his knight. What do I do now? I want to win the knight for. I want to win the 2 pieces, meaning a knight and bishop for my rook. That's why I send my rook to h1. Inaccuracy is the computer. You see how much the score is against me, 4.32. At that time of the game, I knew that what could he do? Things would not go well for him. Not too many squares to move the knight, maybe to g5. But I was hoping that things could start becoming better for me. That was not the case. What he decided to do is the other. I was afraid that he would send a pawn to c5 and threaten my knight and then check from here. Instead, he decided to push the pawn to b4 and threaten my rook. Misses the computer. His best bet would be to, I didn't see this at all, to threaten my rook from the d2 square instead of the pawn from b4. My rook has a lot of squares to go. It's not that it's going to get lost, but Okay, that's what the computer thought, but still he's ahead by 2.55. His advantage goes almost down to half. Merrick, of course, go to d3, protect the knight, extra protection, and of course safeguard my rook first of all, and be in the open d-file. And now he attacks my pawn with the c5. And this seemed to be dangerous. Okay, my knight moves, then pawn goes to c4. It's not exactly fork because my bishop can take the pawn. But first, let's save the knight. The problem is that after moving the knight, Eric has the potential to check from e2 and not too many squares. My king can go. In fact, it has only one square, f1. Uh, Rook goes to f2 check. My king has to go to e1, bishop to g3, and look at that. We're talking about a discover check. I couldn't see, but I knew that he would have many possibilities. I was not completely hopeless, but things did not go well for me at all. I started seeing it. Knight goes to b5. First of all, let's save the knight. Mistakes as a computer would rather have my knight go to e6. Why? If his pawn takes it, I win the knight. If his bishop takes it, we change bishops and I win the knight. Now he sends his bishop, and now what I was afraid is that now that the knight has left the d4 square, he's going to check from here, and I was afraid of what you're going to see here. To d1. Yes, he could take the b2 pawn. I was thinking he would put his bishop on g3 and have a wonderful possibility for discover check. He would take the b2 pawn, and so on, and things would not go well for me at all. What did he do instead? Let's give a look. He sent his bishop to f5 and attacked my rook on d3. Computer says it's a miss. And so while he was so happy he was attacking my rook and forcing my rook to move again, his advantage disappeared almost completely. Instead of 5.04, that would really be enormous if he checked me here. Now he has a very small advantage of 0.23. And first of all, my rook goes to d8 with a check. King goes to d7. Great moves in the computer. King goes to g7. And we completed the first 35 moves, and Eric has a very, very small advantage of 0.27. But now this game I saw, at this point, in fact, I saw that now I could win bishop and knight for my rook. And of course, two minor pieces are better than a rook. Each minor piece is worth 3 pawns usually, and the rook is 5, so 3 plus 3 is 6. 6 more than the 5 of the rook. And that's what I do now. We'll do the exchange. No surprises here. This was to be expected. And now we are even, says the computer, of these exchanges. And his bishop goes to c1 to threaten my pawn on b2. This pawn, I knew it was very difficult to be saved. I was not too worried because it's in the original square. It's already blocked by my bishop, my knight, and 2 pawns of Eric. So didn't want to lose it clearly, but I didn't feel it was desperate case. Computer thinks a mistake, and now I'm ahead by 2.18. I didn't feel at that game. I felt that uh, after these exchanges that we had, what is happening? I'm up by a piece, and Eric has 3 extra pawns. So 3 for 3. And now he's going to win the 4th pawn for the piece. And there's no way I can save it. I cannot, of course, put my rook on d2. Bishop will take it. But I decide to pin the pawn on f7 and threatening basically 2 pawns, b7 and f7. f7 because of the b3 bishop. So what's happening is he'll take my pawn, I'll take his pawn, so it's still 3 pawns for the piece and not 4 pawns. And Eric decides at least let's save the F pawn. We cannot save both. And also he's threatening my pawn on F3. So let's defend this, because if this pawn is gone, these three pawns will be unopposed all the way. If it goes down to a pawn ending, king goes to G2, we save them. And he takes my pawn on B2. And I take the pawn on B7. Well, let's take the free pawn while we can, and then we'll think about the F pawn. And think, I mean, I will put my knight on E6. And he cannot defend. But computer would rather have me directly put my knight on D6 and forget about the B7. But that time I felt, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. It's free, let's take it before it jumps to B6. And still I'm threatening this one. Computer doesn't like it, thinks that my advantage goes down to less than half. Instead of 279, it's 1.09. And Eric decides the H pawn is a passed pawn, no pawns to stop it. Only my king, in fact, is there. And let's start the travels of the H pawn, the trip. Let's start going to H5. Mistakes as a computer. Now I'm ahead by 273. We've completed the first 40 moves. Now from Eric being almost 5 up, especially had he checked from D from E2 when he had the chance. Now I'm up by 273. But I felt that this was a reasonable thing for him to do. Let's push the H pawn as far as possible, perhaps the G pawn as well, and see how much we can press white. Have a counterplay there. Now I'm going to D6. Now the F pawn is lost. Attack 3 times, defended only twice. Attack 3 times. Rook B7, knight D6, bishop B3. Defended by king G7, rook F5. And the other bishop has dark color, so it cannot defend the white color. What else? All the pawns are in front. His pawn on F7, of course, no pawn can defend the pawn on the starting position. What he decides to do? He decides to, in addition to everything else, it's not only the pawn is lost, is his rook is under attack. My knight is threatening his rook, so he must move his rook. But where? Computer would rather have it go to F4. He decides, let's check now and at least postpone the dilemma by my move. G5, I send my king to F1. Why? First of all, I didn't want my king to be blocked on the H file, even though that's what's happening here is that if my king goes to if my king can doesn't have too many places to go. You can go H3 to H1 there. However, it's out of the game. But at least it's stopping the H pawn. If it goes to F1 or F2, it is in the game. But then who is going to stop the H pawn? Things will go very, very difficult. So computer would rather have my king go to H3. The second best move is go to H1. And what I played was the third best move. I didn't want to F2. I didn't want any checks coming from D4, and then the can support the rook for a second check, so on. That's why I sent my king to F1. Not the best move, but still I'm ahead by 227. And then Eric decided to activate the king. That's what they say in the end game. You activate the king, you move the king towards the center. He sends the king to F6. And the moment he did this, and I noticed because I knew that my knight had a wonderful place. If his king went to dark squares, he was in trouble. And the moment he did this and my advantage became 7.20, he resigned immediately without even waiting for me, because I was going to place my knight to E4 and win at least the exchange. That's why my advantage from 236 went up triples to 7.20. And at this point, Eric resigned. Eric, he played a very good game. He didn't give up after the exchange. He missed one or two crucial moves, but other than that, really, he played quite well. Let's see what the review has to say. I had accuracy 78.4, nothing to be proud of. Eric had 73.8, a little bit less. I played as if my rating was 1950. I don't think so. Too many mistakes. And Eric as if it was 1750. Let's look at the various categories. Computer says that none of us had a brilliant move. Great 4 versus 3 for me. Book 5 versus 4 for me. Best 14 versus 12 for me. Excellent 6 versus 1 for Eric. 4 good moves each of us. Inaccuracies 8 for me, 6 for Eric. Mistakes 3 for me, 4 for Eric. Misses 3. I had 3 misses. Eric had 1 and Eric had 2 blunders. And this completes the coverage of the second round. And I had a win. Finally, I had a win. And so until now, I have one loss in round one from Brian Lawson and one win from Eric Jimenez in round two. My partner, Ego, lost his second game. So a team, the last moment team, we started with a loss in round one, where both of us lost the games. Round two, we have a draw against the opponent team that's called the Knicks Knights King. His opponent, Eric Go's opponent was Nick Karas. And so a team has one loss and one draw. And let's see what's happening to the round number three will take place a week from now, next Friday, the 23rd. Let's see what's happening at the tournaments that be following. In the grecochess, nothing changes. 2 games remaining between Maxim Govorukh from the Ukraine and Barak Seven from Israel. We'll follow them, and once the games complete, we are going to present them to you. And if any player gets out of these two gets 1.5 at least out of two, meaning they win both or have a win and a draw, it is the tournament champion. Otherwise, if they have one win each or a draw or two draws, they'll tie, and we'll discuss with them how to resolve the draw. And let's see what's happening to the other tournament. That's in round number 2, the Moonlight Underwater, where I have already been eliminated from round number 1. There are 4 groups of 7 players each in round 2. And in let's see what's happening. Group 1, Maxim Govorukh leads with 8 points in 9 games. In Group 2, it is PG74 from Italy leading with 7 points. But since you see that many players have not played enough games, leading now doesn't mean too much. In Group 3, Iraq Lion leads with 6 points out of 7 games. And in Group 4, it is Lysithia Vantres from Japan is leading with 6 points. That's it for now. And unless anything happens, like a game in Greco chess completes, or I hit my milestone, and my next milestone, by the way, is in the bullet chess to reach 1500 rating, or anything else spectacular happens, the next video should be me facing the last bot from Argentina, the last intermediate bot with white and then with black pieces. Thanks for watching. Thanks to all the viewers, the subscribers. If you have not subscribed yet, just click this button. You may think doing it so you'll be notified of the games. And thanks to the comments, the likes. This is Greco Chess. I'm Harry Lausanisiris, and for now, goodbye.